Hotep Peace Family, Dashan Barad here. Welcome back to Expressions in Blackness, a show in which I speak with prominent Black figures from across the diaspora. Every guest that we have on this show is a special guest, so I'm going to announce this special and phenomenal guest. I want you to help me welcome Dr. Patrick H. Freeman. He's a feature writer for the Buffalo Criterion Newspaper. He now offers his 29 years of experience in sports broadcasting to help young broadcasters master the art of the interview. Actually, that is the name of his book, The Art of the Interview, Book 1. So we're going to get right to it. We're not going to keep our brother. And so, Dr. Freeman, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, brother. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you and your audience today.
And just to let you know, for those of you who may not be aware, Buffalo, as in Buffalo, New York. This is where our brother is located. So, Dr. Freeman, if you would, please, right now the platform is yours. Let us know about why you wrote this book, which is a good one, by the way.
Well, I wanted to share my 700 or more interviews that I did over my 14-year talk show history with WFO Radio. The name of my show was The Message, and I've interviewed some of the most phenomenal figures in our history of the recent 20th and 21st centuries. And I just wanted to share some of that invaluable information. You can't put a value on some of the people that I have had the ability and the pleasure of interviewing, such as Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, Dr. Khalid Muhammad. I can go on and on. Some of the figures that I have interviewed, and some of them we even tried to bring to the Buffalo area. I went to Egypt with Dr. Asa Hilliard back in 1997. That trip changed my life, and it made me more conscious and aware of what was going on around us. And I wanted to share some of those experiences with you in this first book.
So I see that some people had actually contributed. You mentioned, of course, Khalid. I didn't know about Brother Khalid, but you were mentioning, I saw on the back cover, not the back cover, but one of the things you sent me, of course, you had Dr. Naeem Akbar.
Yes, sir.
You had, of course, you mentioned Dr. Wilson, Kwame Ture, otherwise known as Stokely Carmichael. What I wanted to know, what was it like interviewing such powerful figures for you?
Well, I was a little nervous, especially with Kwame Ture and Malcolm X's daughter, because I hold him in such high esteem that just talking to his daughter, it just made me feel like I was closer to him. And during that interview, we really touched on some things that I did not know. And you try to bring out the most on every interview you do. That's why it's an art of interviewing, because you look at what that person has done and what they've collected, and you try to pull that information out for your audience.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Of course, now, what are some of the key things that you would recommend for a person that's getting started in this interviewing, whether they be celebrities, whether they be public figures, whether they be non-celebrities, non-public figures? What's the key thing that you would recommend?
Doing your research on that person, knowing their work. And I always try to follow the Johnny Cochran rule. If you remember, during the O.J. Simpson trial, Johnny Cochran made sure that people understood that you never ask a question that you don't already know the answer. And when Christopher Darden asked O.J. Simpson to put on the glove and it didn't fit, that went against the cardinal rule of cross-examination. You did not really know the answer to that question, and it was exposed to the nation that those gloves did not fit O.J. Simpson. So how could he have committed this crime? And I think that was one of the pinnacle moments during that trial, which led to his eventual acquittal. So I try to follow that rule with every interview, is to try to do my research, whereas I know the answer myself before the person answers it that I'm interviewing. Because what happens if they go against what they've put in writing? And I had that happen one time when I was interviewing Gary Greenberg, who is the author of the Moses Mystery. And I interviewed him, and he seemed to contradict what he had put in writing. So I had to follow up and ask him a question. I said, well, this is what you wrote. So are you going against what you're writing now? Or are you changing your perspective? And that can happen too. So you have to do your research in interviewing somebody, and you end up becoming closer to that person than you really understand after the interview, because after every interview, you get to know that person extremely well.
So this book is more like, and I'm not at all trying to make the book non-emotional about how I'm going to describe it. This is like an instruction manual.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. More than just a regular read. If you follow the concept of the book and the transcript of the interview, you see I had to dive deep into what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing was doing throughout her career. Her whole career is centered around racism and white supremacy. And you have to understand what her concepts are when you are asking her some of the questions so that they make sense to your audience.
Okay, now just to be very clear, we know, of course, that you're an excellent writer and, of course, a broadcaster. But about how many of these people, the huge amount of people that you spoke with, how many of these were on-air interviews as opposed to in-print interviews? Did you do both? Did you do strictly on-air, strictly print? What was that?
Most of them were on air. And print, I might have done some, but most of them, over 700 interviews, were on air over a 14-year period. So over 14 years, I collected some 700 interviews. I did a series with the exalted ancestor, Dr. Runoko Rashidi, on the African origins all over the earth. So we looked at several parts of the earth where the Africans were the originators of that geographical location and where civilization emerged from our contributions. And that was one of the best series I ever did. And he did some phenomenal work before he was exalted to the degree of ancestor just a couple of years ago.
Now, that actually takes me back to something you said when you traveled to Kemet. For those of you who don't know what Kemet is, we still have a lot of folks that need to play catch up. That was actually most of our African Senate historians will say that that's actually the oldest name for what we refer to currently as Egypt. You traveled there with Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, you stated.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Did you
and that was 1997.
Okay. Remember when Gil Noble? Oh, hold 1 second. The lights are going off in here. Hold on, brother. I gotta pause this, brother. Hold 1 second, Doc.
Right.
Family, sorry about that glitch. I'm in this room right now that has a motion sensor, so I gotta keep doing this throughout. I don't want to keep doing this throughout the interview because I don't want you to think that I was having a spaz or anything or spit. Anyway, Dr. Freeman, when you went over there with Dr. Hilliard, did you do that before or after speaking with him on air? There's a reason I'm asking.
I interviewed him after, twice after, and then he was our keynote for the Eastern Regional ASCAC conference here afterwards, and I interviewed him prior to that. But most of my interviews with him were after our research tour in ancient Kemet, where we were inducted into what he called then the Holy Royal Family. Mm-hmm. And many of us were inducted into the Holy Royal Family after we completed our pilgrimage in looking at the temples and the pyramids and our ancestors and how their culture precipitated all civilizations that claim to take ownership of that land. And in doing that, it just changed my life. It made me have a better understanding of everything. And once you see that everything's origins is connected to one another, you see the beauty and the spirituality of our people, and you see that in all of us today.
So how many times have you been to the continent?
Just once. Just once. I mean, that was my big, big opportunity. It's not cheap, as you well know. It costs pretty good money. And my research was centered on the origins of the Coptic Church, the Egyptian Coptic Church. And that was what I did my research paper on when I was over there. And I went to the site where the original Egyptian Coptic Church was. And most people don't realize, they think that the Catholic Church was the first Christian church. It was not. It was first the Egyptian Coptic Church, which later became it merged into, not merged, but it spread into Ethiopian, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. All of those churches emerged out of what was originally the Egyptian Coptic Church, and the Catholic Church did not come until after the Council of Nice. And see, most of us don't know that history, and the history of Christianity is as old as old. It was originally just an African spirituality that was practiced all over the continent of Africa and spread throughout the world.
So, Dr. Freeman, as I'm listening to you, it's quite obvious that your journalism, your media career is Afrocentric or African-centered.
Yes.
Me asking you that, and please pardon me because, of course, I didn't read the book fully. There's so much that you have, and I'm going to be honest with you, I've taken tips from it. And I've been doing this for quite some time. I've taken tips from it. And so, we're, as broadcasters, we're always perfecting our art.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever, and I might be naive asking this question, I take it you've spoken with on air and in person, Dr. Malefi Asante?
Yes, sir. Yes, I've interviewed Dr. Malefi Asante on a couple of occasions, and we also brought him as our guest speaker for Malcolm X Day here in Buffalo, New York.
So what was that like speaking with Dr. I have to ask you, actually, there's so many, there's so many people I want to ask you about. So you already described Dr. Asa G. Hill. You described, your interaction with Dr. Wilson, I should say. I'm going to ask you, what was it like speaking with Dr. Asante, knowing him, he's still with us, but I also want you to tell us about your interactions with other people such as, Clark, Ben, whoever you feel like discussing stayed with you the most in terms of relationships. And
well, I tell you, every one of them. I interviewed Dr. Ben maybe 10 times before he was exalted to the degree of ancestor. Dr. Jacob Carruthers, you mentioned before, Kwame Ture, Dr. Jeremiah Wright. Dr. Jeremiah Wright was probably my most enjoyable interview because I interviewed him a few weeks after the controversy with the Clinton campaign and Barack Obama, who was then Senator Obama and who was a member of Dr. Wright's church. And for me to do that interview, I contacted his secretary, and they made me sign a waiver that I would not ask any questions pertaining to then Senator Barack Obama or his family, and which I did. I sent that back to them. And when the interview started, it was he was a little standoffish until he got to know me.
Did he know, did he know that you were his frat brother? Did he know that?
I did tell him, but he was still, you could tell he was wondering if I was going to honor the agreement. You could tell that in his words. But I think as the interview started going on, he saw that I had done a significant amount of research on him and his career. And he began, I think he got a comfort zone with me as a questioner, and it ended up becoming one of my best interviews. And I included that as the last chapter of my first book.
Okay, now, this book is called Book One.
Yes, sir.
What is in Book Two that isn't in Book One?
Well, I will include probably some of my other more controversial interviews, such as I interviewed Dr. Zach Kondo regarding his book on unraveling the mystery of the assassination of Malcolm X. I believe we did like 3 interviews on that subject, and I probably will include that. Many of the others that I have over 700 interviews, and I probably will include some of those. I haven't picked out the ones that I'm going to include at this point, but I would say that some of the ones that I mentioned will be some of the ones I've included.
Now, Dr. Freeman, I learned as an undergrad in 1996 1986, when I was 19 years old, when I first began broadcasting. I went to school for this as well. And I realized that this business, especially for revolutionary Black folks, can be very dangerous.
Yes, sir.
What was your experience with that in doing what you do? You know exactly what I'm speaking about, but please give us a snapshot of that.
Well, you almost have to have, you have to be aware of your surroundings at all times, because people, with the rise of social media, it makes you susceptible to certain attacks. And you just have to know your surroundings. And with social media, if I get attacked in the wrong way, I just block the person and keep it moving, because the mission that we're on is one of education of our community. And that must be first and foremost. And people will try to get you off track talking about something that has nothing to do with what you're trying to accomplish. So I don't let that happen. I just block you and keep it moving. But I'm always aware of my surroundings at all times, especially with this atmosphere where this country has gone now.
Okay. Now, when you say where this country is going now, as media people, we're always observing trends in the climate. Where this country is going now, I want you to elaborate on that.
Well, we're almost in the middle of a civil war. Brother Dale Jones, the war correspondent who I interviewed several times, he has since been exalted to the degree of ancestor. He talked about this in his last book, that we as Africans would be caught in the middle of a civil war between extremists on one side and extremists on the other. And it seems that we are now caught up in that civil war now. You have traditional Europeans fighting extreme Europeans. And where do we land as African people is a question. How do we survive this, and how can we proceed in the name of peace? And that's what people don't understand, is that we were always a peaceful people. Y'all have been fighting for hundreds of years, and we're trying to bring peace back to this planet. The only way you can do that is to treat everyone in the same way that you expect to be treated. As journalists, we have to keep bringing the truth back to the table to fix the damage of enslavement. Enslavement was an attack on the very character of the culture of African people on a worldwide level. So we're in a fight to regain who we are at all times. And part of that, as journalists, is bringing truthful information, standing for that information, and making sure that information is validated and verified.
Wow, Dr. Freeman, as the older folks used to say, you're on the case, obviously. But as we wind down, I want to ask you, among our colleagues, who are some of our colleagues that you've maintained, whether it be, as they say, nationally known, locally known? Who are some of our colleagues that you've interacted with? And I'm speaking about, did you ever cross paths with Gil Noble or Tony Brown, or in that line, if you would?
Well, the person, I don't know if I've actually crossed paths with them, but I'm well aware of their work and respected it. And a lot of the things that we do, we model off of each other. So absolutely, Gil Noble, Listerfelt Middleton, I thought was one of the great people in journalism, and his works are noteworthy. Also, Imhotep Gary Bird. He started at WUFO Radio in Buffalo, New York. He is one of the finest broadcasters of all time, and has done more for the conscious movement than most people realize. Bob Law, if you remember, tremendous work. His work in spreading the word of the Million Man March helped to make that one of the largest marches in American history. So all of those people, Gil Nobles, all of them, their work is priceless. And I've tried to model a little bit of all of them into a composite. And I hope that people like yourself look at my work over time and say, man, I want to do something like Freeman too, or I want to model a little bit of what I have done. And I've tried to grab people and pull them up also, especially as you know, I've covered 23 Super Bowls. I've been in sports a long time. I'm a member of the Pro Football Writers of America, but I'm just not a member of Pro Football Writers of America. I've recruited 9 other young people to become members of Pro Football Writers of America, because if we don't tell the story, right, somebody else will.
Dr. Freeman, I think about that often. It reminds me of Dr. Clark talking about the narrative, the Black narrative being in the
Yes, sir.
hands of non-Black people for 5 centuries. So what I'm going to do, Dr. Freeman, as we conclude, please let us know where we can get your book. And I don't know if you have a copy with you now that you can show to the screen or.
Give me 1 second. I
Okay.
do. Give
I'll,
me 1 second. I'll be right back.
I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause. There we go.
You ready?
We're ready.
All right, there it is right there. You can get it from Amazon or your local bookstores. They can order it for you, but it is available through Amazon Books, and it's under my name, and it's available as we speak for a very moderate price, which benefits us as authors. I mean, there's not much money in this field for those of us that are dedicated to the work. So the little bit that we get, it keeps us going, as you well know.
Okay, well, family, thank you. I want you to join me in thanking Dr. Patrick Freeman for being my 3rd guest on this show, Expressions in Blackness. And if you would like to support the show's upkeep, you can cash at me at $D Farad, Venmo Dashan Farad, or PayPal and Zelle under my number 347-898-5556. We're also asking you to please subscribe to this channel, my channel. For now, all of my episodes of this show will be uploaded. And of course, on my channel, you can see all the other stories I've covered aside from this show, but also on Facebook and on Twitter, and I believe Instagram. Make sure you follow Dr. Patrick Freeman. And as I'm listening to you, Dr. Freeman, you definitely are a Freeman.
Yes, sir.
I'm not surprised that your last name is Freeman.
It's your name, you got to live it too. You know, you got to live it.
I'm not at all surprised. Well, anyway, family, and of course, Dr. Freeman, definitely stay with me for I'm going to end the stream, but you'll still be on. So anyway,
Okay.
thank you very much for joining me. Dashan Farad Hotep.